A 10-year-old boy is handcuffed, dragged from his home, and locked in a jail cell, accused of a crime he didn't commit. The person accusing him? A police officer. The evidence? None. Now this little boy stands in court, staring up at adults who have already decided he's guilty. When no one believes you, how do you prove the truth? Where are you watching from? Drop your country in the comments, and tell me, do you think justice always prevails, or is the truth sometimes ignored? This is the story of a little boy who refused to stay silent, who faced a system that saw him as guilty before hearing his side. But the road to justice, it wasn't easy. Have you ever felt completely powerless? Like no matter how loud you screamed, no one would hear you? No one would believe you? Now imagine, you're just a child, 10 years old, small, helpless, alone, facing a world that has already decided you're guilty. Malik Johnson was just a boy. He wasn't a troublemaker. He wasn't someone the world would look at twice. He was just a regular 10-year-old kid with big dreams, the kind of dreams that didn't always fit in the place he called home. He lived in a small, rundown neighborhood where the buildings stood tired and cracked, where sirens echoed through the streets more often than laughter. His mother, Lisa, worked long shifts as a nurse, barely making ends meet. His grandmother, old and frail, would hold his hand and tell him stories about the people who fought for justice, stories about courage, about standing up when the world tried to push you down. Malik loved those stories. He believed in them. He believed that if you did the right thing, if you were honest and good, the law would protect you. He wanted to be a lawyer one day, not for money, not for power, but because he wanted to help people like his mother, like his grandmother, and like the neighbors who struggled every day just to get by. But Malik didn't know that believing in justice wasn't always enough. He didn't know that, in his world, the color of his skin could turn him into a suspect before he ever spoke a word. In his neighborhood, kids like him were taught different lessons than the ones in school. Not math, not science, but rules for survival. Never run, even if you're scared. Never look a cop in the eye for too long. If they stop you, don't talk back. Don't ask why. Just do what they say. Malik had heard these rules his entire life, but he never truly understood them. Why should he be afraid of the police if he hadn't done anything wrong? Why should he have to lower his eyes, lower his voice, lower himself just to stay safe? His mother would sigh and say, "Baby, the world doesn't always care about what's right. It only cares about what it chooses to believe." Malik didn't understand that, but he was about to. Because in just one moment, one unexpected, cruel moment, everything he believed in would shatter. It was one of those golden afternoons, the kind where the sun painted long shadows on the pavement, stretching lazily across the quiet streets. The air was warm, thick with the scent of summer, and laughter rang out like music in the distance. Malik dribbled his basketball, weaving between his friends, his sneakers skidding against the cracked asphalt. His heart pounded, not from fear, not from worry, but from pure, unfiltered joy. The game wasn't just a game, it was freedom. The ball bounced, quick and steady, the rhythm of their youth echoing between the buildings. For a moment, nothing else existed. No school, no responsibilities. No worries about how his mother was working late again or how his grandmother's health was getting worse. Just this fleeting, weightless moment where he was just a kid, laughing, running, feeling the wind rush past his skin. Then it happened, a sudden crack. A sound so sharp, so unnatural, it sliced through their laughter like a knife. The game stopped. The ball rolled, forgotten, to the edge of the sidewalk. Malik turned toward the noise, his breath catching in his throat. A police cruiser sat at the corner of the street, its windshield shattered, spiderwebbed with cracks. Inside the car, a man sat frozen for a second before pushing the door open with force. Officer Bradley. Even before he stepped out, the tension in the air changed. It was like the temperature had dropped. The laughter was gone. The freedom, gone. Malik had seen Officer Bradley before. Everyone in the neighborhood had. He wasn't the kind of cop who smiled and waved. He was the kind who made people nervous, the kind who stopped kids for no reason and asked them too many questions. The kind who looked at people like Malik and his friends and saw trouble before he saw anything else. Bradley's face was red with anger, his jaw tight as he scanned the street. His gaze swept over the group of boys, lingering on Malik. His fingers twitched, curling into fists at his sides. Then his eyes locked onto Malik's, and in that moment, Malik felt it. A verdict. A decision had already been made. The moment the rock hit the windshield, the world seemed to stop. The sharp crack shattered the warm afternoon air, replacing the sound of bouncing basketballs and laughter with something heavier, something dangerous. For a split second, no one moved. Then, the police cruiser screeched to a stop. Malik barely had time to process what had happened before the door flew open. A man stepped out, his boots hitting the pavement hard. Officer Bradley. The shift in the atmosphere was immediate. The kids didn't need to be told. They just knew. The game was over. The joy of the afternoon had vanished, sucked into the gaping silence that followed the officer's arrival. Malik's hands felt clammy. He wasn't afraid, not yet, but something in the way Bradley's eyes scanned the group made his stomach twist. It wasn't a look of curiosity. It was something colder, sharper. The officer's gaze swept over the boys, one by one. Then, it stopped. On Malik. He wasn't the only one there. He wasn't the only one who could have thrown the rock. But he was the closest. He was the easiest choice. Bradley's face darkened. "You throw that rock at my car?" His voice was sharp, edged with something Malik couldn't quite place. For a moment, Malik couldn't breathe. His pulse pounded in his ears, drowning out everything else. He wanted to shake his head, but his body wouldn't move. "No, sir, I didn't do anything." His voice came out steady, but inside, panic was creeping in. Bradley took a step forward, then another. Malik's feet itched to move, to back away, but he forced himself to stay still. "Don't run. Don't make it worse." His mother's voice echoed in his head. But it didn't matter. Bradley's hand snapped out, his fingers clamping down around Malik's wrist. The world tilted. "I didn't do anything," Malik gasped, twisting against the officer's grip, but it was useless. His small arm felt like it was caught in a vice. The murmurs started immediately. "That's just a kid." "Officer, he was just playing." Then, a new voice. Sharp, desperate. "Let him go." His mother. Lisa Johnson shoved her way through the crowd, her breath ragged, her eyes wild with fear. She reached out, fingers trembling as they grasped at Malik's free arm. "Please, he's just a child. He didn't do anything." She wasn't pleading, she was demanding. But it didn't matter. Bradley didn't even look at her. His grip tightened as he twisted Malik's small arms behind his back. The cold metal of the handcuffs snapped into place. A broken sob tore from his mother's throat. Malik looked up at her, his wide, terrified eyes searching hers. "Mom?" Her hands clutched at her chest as if she could physically hold in the pain. The ball he had been dribbling minutes ago rolled to the curb, forgotten. Around them, the crowd stirred, restless and uncertain. People watched, shaking their heads, whispering, "That boy's never been in trouble before. This isn't right, he's just a kid." But no one moved. No one stepped forward, because here, in this place, against a badge, against a uniform, words meant nothing. And neither did the truth. The police station smelled of stale coffee, sweat, and something metallic that Malik couldn't quite place. It clung to the air, thick and suffocating, wrapping around him like invisible chains. His wrists throbbed where the handcuffs had bitten into his skin, thin red marks left behind as proof that this was real. That this was happening. He had never been inside a police station before. Not like this. The overhead fluorescent lights flickered, buzzing faintly, casting a dull, sickly glow over the whitewashed walls. Officers moved past him, their voices low, their expressions indifferent, as if he were nothing more than another case file, another name on a report. None of them stopped, none of them looked at him with concern, until one did. An older officer, his broad frame looming over Malik, paused just for a moment. His eyes traveled over the small boy in front of him, not with curiosity, not even with pity, but with something colder. A silent judgment. Then, under his breath, just loud enough to be heard, he muttered, "Another one." He shook his head as he turned to his colleague. "They all end up here sooner or later." The words hit harder than the handcuffs. Malik swallowed, his small hands curling into fists at his sides, not from anger, not even from defiance, but because, for the first time in his life, a terrible, unshakable thought crept into his mind. Was this all they saw when they looked at him? Not a 10-year-old boy, not a kid with dreams, just another statistic, another case number. His mother had always told him he could be anything, a doctor, a lawyer, a man who made a difference. But these men had already decided. His future had been written before he ever got the chance to live it. A firm hand clamped down on his shoulder, jerking him forward. Move. He was marched down a dimly lit hallway, past rows of locked doors. The further they walked, the colder the air became, pressing against his skin like a weight he couldn't shake. The smell of sweat and metal grew stronger. A door creaked open. The cell wasn't big. A cot against the wall, stiff and gray. A metal toilet in the corner. Concrete everywhere he looked, and bars. Thick, cold, unforgiving. The officer behind him didn't bother with instructions. He just shoved Malik forward. In. Malik stumbled, catching himself on the edge of the cot. His heart pounded so hard it hurt. Then came the sound. The door clanged shut. The lock slid into place with a weighty finality that sent something sharp and icy through Malik's chest. His breath hitched. He turned toward the bars, expecting, hoping someone would still be there. But he was alone. Small. Trapped. And for the first time in his life, Malik Johnson knew what it truly meant. To be powerless. The silence in the cell was louder than anything Malik had ever heard. He sat on the edge of the cot, knees pulled to his chest, his arms wrapped tightly around them, like he could somehow make himself smaller. Like maybe if he took up less space, all of this would disappear. But it didn't. The walls stayed cold, the air stayed heavy, and the metal bars stood firm, unyielding. His breath was shaky, uneven. His chest rose and fell too fast, his heart hammering against his ribs like it was trying to break free. This wasn't supposed to happen. This wasn't how the world worked. If you always do the right thing, you'll never have to be afraid. His mother's voice echoed in his mind, warm, certain. It had always made sense before. But now he had done everything right. He hadn't run, he hadn't talked back, he hadn't lied, and still, he was here. His fingers tightened against his arms as he stared blankly at the gray concrete floor. What if doing the right thing didn't matter? What if it never had? Lisa Johnson stood in the dimly lit hallway of the police station, her hands trembling, her breath shallow. The walls around her felt too close, the air too thick, pressing down on her chest like a weight she couldn't shake. Please, just let me see my son. Her voice wavered, but she stood her ground. The officer at the desk barely looked up. He sighed, flipping through paperwork, his tone flat. Ma'am, you can't see him right now. He's in holding. Holding. Like her child was some kind of criminal. Like he wasn't just 10 years old. Her fingers dug into her palms, nails pressing into flesh as she struggled to steady herself. He's just a boy, she whispered. He's scared. He needs his mother. The officer finally met her eyes. There was no sympathy there. No understanding, just indifference. Come back in the morning. Lisa's knees felt weak. She reached for the counter as if it could hold her up, as if it could stop the room from spinning. Morning. That meant Malik would spend the night here, alone, locked in a cell like a criminal. Her breath caught in her throat, a strangled sob breaking free. She clenched her fists, pressing them against her lips to stop herself from screaming. This wasn't happening. This couldn't be happening. But it was. She turned away from the desk, shoulders shaking, her mind racing. She had to do something. Call someone. Find someone who could fix this. But deep down, she knew the truth. There was no one. She was alone in this fight. She pressed her back against the cold wall and slid down to the floor, her hands clutching her head. She had spent her entire life teaching her son to be good, to be respectful, to follow the rules. And yet, here she was. Here he was. She squeezed her eyes shut, willing the tears to stop, but they wouldn't. She stayed there, sitting on the cold tile, waiting for morning, waiting to bring her baby home. But even as the hours stretched on, one thought burned in her mind. Even if she could bring him home. This nightmare was far from over. The courtroom was too big. The ceilings stretched impossibly high, the walls lined with books and framed portraits of judges and men who had never looked like him. The wooden benches were filled with strangers, people in stiff suits, people who spoke in low, measured tones, people who weren't afraid, because they weren't the ones standing where he stood. Malik was small. His feet barely touched the ground as he sat in the stiff wooden chair beside a lawyer, a stranger he had met just that morning. His fingers curled around the edge of the seat, gripping tightly, his knuckles turning pale against his dark skin. His chest rose and fell too fast. His breaths were short, uneven. His eyes darted around the room, searching for someone to anchor him. Then he found her. His mother. She sat in the front row, her back rigid, her hands clasped so tightly in her lap that her knuckles were white. She wasn't crying, but he could see it. The way her lips pressed into a thin, colorless line. The way her body was still, too still, as if she were holding everything inside, willing herself not to break. She was trying to be strong for him. He wanted to be strong for her too. But he was just 10, and right now he had never felt smaller in his life. A movement caught his eye. Across the room, standing tall in his uniform, was Officer Bradley. His posture was confident, his expression unreadable. But his eyes held something Malik recognized. Certainty. He had already decided Malik was guilty. Maybe he had decided the moment he stepped out of that squad car. Malik's stomach twisted. He wanted to say something, to defend himself, to scream that he hadn't done anything. But his voice felt locked in his throat, trapped under the weight of the walls around him. All rise. The bailiff's voice rang through the room, commanding absolute. Malik scrambled to his feet, his legs shaky beneath him. The wooden chair scraped loudly against the floor, the sound too sharp, too harsh in the heavy silence. The judge entered, robes flowing as he took his seat at the bench, high above them all. The room moved like a wave, people standing, shifting, sitting again, an orchestrated rhythm that Malik wasn't a part of. Then, the gavel struck. A sharp, hollow sound. Final. And just like that, his fate belonged to someone else. The air in the courtroom felt even heavier now, pressing down on Malik's small frame like an invisible weight. He sat frozen, his hands gripping his knees, his pulse thudding in his ears. Then, a chair scraped against the floor as Officer Bradley rose to his feet. He moved with ease, unbothered, his uniform crisp, his badge gleaming under the harsh courtroom lights. He stood tall, shoulders squared, confidence radiating from him as he walked to the witness stand. Once seated, he adjusted the microphone, cleared his throat, and spoke. I saw him. I saw that boy throw the rock. His voice was steady. Sure. Malik's stomach dropped. It was him, Bradley continued. I was driving down the street and out of nowhere he hurled it, straight at my windshield. I watched it happen with my own eyes. There wasn't a flicker of doubt in his voice. No hesitation, just certainty, delivered with the authority of a man used to being believed. Malik clenched his fists, his mouth opened slightly, but no words came out. How could he argue with that? How could he fight against a man in uniform, against someone who the world listened to without question? The prosecutor stood, buttoning his suit jacket as he turned to face the jury. His tone was calm, smooth, too smooth. Ladies and gentlemen, this case is simple. We have an officer of the law, a man who has sworn to serve and protect, who witnessed the crime firsthand. He turned slightly, gesturing toward Bradley, who sat unwavering, arms crossed over his chest. And on the other side, a boy, a child who, let's be honest, has every reason to lie. Malik's breath caught in his throat. Why would Officer Bradley make this up? What reason would he have to lie? The words rang out in the courtroom, bouncing off the walls, sinking deep into the air between them. The prosecutor didn't need to say it. He didn't have to spell it out. The message was clear. A police officer's word meant everything. A black boy's word meant nothing. The courtroom felt colder now. Malik sat stiffly in his chair, his fingers gripping the edges, his small body tense. The prosecutor's words still lingered in the air, wrapping around him like a net, pulling him under. Why would Officer Bradley lie? His stomach twisted. He wanted to speak, to tell them it wasn't true, to say that he didn't throw that rock, but the words sat heavy in his throat, unmoving. Then a soft shuffle beside him. His lawyer stood up. Malik looked up at him. The man who was supposed to fight for him, supposed to prove his innocence. A man he had met just hours ago. He was older, with thinning hair and tired eyes, his suit slightly wrinkled as if he had rushed to be here. He held a stack of papers in his hands, but he didn't look down at them. He just exhaled, adjusting his glasses before stepping forward. Your Honor, he began, his voice calm but thin, like a thread stretched too tight. He turned toward Officer Bradley. You said you saw my client throw the rock, but it was evening, wasn't it? The sun was setting, shadows were long. Are you absolutely certain it was Malik Johnson? Bradley didn't even flinch. I know what I saw. The lawyer nodded slowly, flipping through his papers. He paused as if searching for something, anything that could help. Then, after a moment too long, he sighed. No further questions. Malik's stomach dropped. That was it? That was all? He looked over at his mother. Her hands were clasped so tightly in her lap that her knuckles had gone white. Her face was blank, but her eyes burned with something Malik had never seen before. She had known. She had known they couldn't afford a real defense. A private attorney, one with experience, with power, with the ability to push back against men like Bradley, someone who could fight for her son the way he deserved. But they didn't have money for that. So they got this. A lawyer who didn't have time. A lawyer with too many cases, too many kids just like Malik, sitting in too many courtrooms just like this one. A lawyer who had already lost before the trial had even begun. Malik swallowed hard, a lump forming in his throat. He had always thought that telling the truth would be enough, that innocence would protect him. But now, for the first time, he realized this courtroom didn't care about the truth. It only cared about who had the power to shape it. The judge's face was unreadable, his eyes scanning the papers in front of him, his expression void of emotion. Malik sat frozen, his small hands clenched in his lap, his heart pounding so hard he could feel it in his throat. He didn't understand every word that had been spoken in that courtroom. Some terms were too big, some arguments too fast, but he understood this moment. He understood what was coming. The judge finally looked up. Given the testimony presented and the need for further investigation, the court orders that the defendant, Malik Johnson, remain in custody until further proceedings. The words landed like a hammer, a sharp, heavy weight pressed down on Malik's chest, making it hard to breathe. No, his mother's voice cut through the silence, desperate, pleading. He's just a child. Please, Your Honor, he's only 10. He didn't do this. The judge didn't even look at her. The gavel struck once. The sound echoed in Malik's ears, ringing over and over, drowning out everything else. He couldn't move. He couldn't think. He was going back. Back to that cold, empty cell. Back to the silence. Back to the feeling of being nothing, of being no one. Tears burned his eyes, but he refused to let them fall. He wanted to be strong. He wanted to believe that this was just a mistake, that someone would fix it, that someone would stand up and say this wasn't right. But no one did. The bailiff stepped forward. Malik felt his mother's presence before he even saw her. Her warmth, her scent, her desperation as she lunged toward him. Baby, I'm here. I'm right here. Strong hands pulled him away before he could reach her. His mother's sobs filled the courtroom as the doors swung open, swallowing him whole. Malik didn't fight, didn't struggle, didn't even look back, because for the first time in his life he understood. This wasn't about truth. This wasn't about justice. This was about the fact that he never stood a chance. The world kept moving. But for Malik, time had stopped. Days passed. His mother fought, pleaded, did everything she could to bring him home. But the system moved slowly. Too slowly. And Malik? He sat in a cold gray cell, waiting. But out there, beyond those walls, someone was watching. Mr. Harris had lived in the neighborhood for over 30 years. He was a retired Marine, a man who had always believed in law and order, in right and wrong. He had trusted the system because he had served under it, upheld it. But something about that night didn't sit right. He had been sitting on his porch, sipping his evening coffee, when he heard the commotion, the shouts, the sharp crack of a windshield breaking. He had watched as the police car screeched to a stop, as Officer Bradley stormed out, as Malik, just a child, was dragged away in cuffs. At first, he hadn't thought much of it. The police didn't arrest kids for no reason. At least, that's what he had always believed. But the next morning, he couldn't shake the image of Malik's mother, the way she had screamed for her son, her voice raw and broken, the desperation in her eyes, and that feeling in his gut, the one he'd learned to trust during his years in the military, told him something was wrong. And then, he remembered. His cameras. After a string of break-ins a few years ago, he had installed security cameras around his house. One of them faced the street. His hands shook as he sat at his desk, pulling up the footage from that night. He clicked through the timeline, his breath shallow. The screen flickered, grainy black and white images playing in front of him. Then, there it was, a blurry figure on a bike, a quick motion, a rock flying through the air. His eyes locked onto the truth. It wasn't Malik. It wasn't even someone who looked like him. It was someone else entirely. Mr. Harris felt something deep in his chest. Something cold, something heavy. For years, he had trusted the system. He had believed that justice, though not always perfect, would always correct itself in the end. But now, watching this footage, he realized something far worse. Justice didn't just fail sometimes. Sometimes, it never even tried. The video played in grainy black and white, flickering slightly as Mr. Harris leaned in closer, his breath slow, deliberate. His hands hovered over the keyboard, one finger tapping impatiently as the footage moved forward, second by second. The street looked quiet at first, just kids playing, a normal evening. Then, movement. A figure flashed across the screen, darting from the left side. Mr. Harris squinted, his eyes narrowing as he focused. A bike. Someone riding fast. Then, there it was. A hand reaching down. A rock lifted, a sharp flick of the wrist. The glass shattered in an instant, spiderwebbing across the windshield. But it wasn't Malik. The kid on the screen wasn't small. Wasn't wearing the same clothes Malik had been wearing that evening. And he wasn't black. He was white. A white teenager, older, maybe 15 or 16, his hoodie pulled up as he sped away, disappearing into the night like he had never been there at all. Mr. Harris sat back, his heart pounding. He rewound it, watched again and again. Each time, the truth stared back at him, undeniable. Malik hadn't thrown that rock. He hadn't even been near it. But that hadn't mattered, because Officer Bradley hadn't been looking for the truth. He had been looking for someone to blame. And now, because of that, a 10-year-old boy was sitting in a jail cell, believing the world had already given up on him. Mr. Harris exhaled sharply, his fingers gripping the edge of the desk. Not this time. Not if he had anything to do with it. Mr. Harris didn't waste a second. His hands moved quickly, downloading the video onto a flash drive, his breath short and tight. He had seen a lot in his lifetime. War, loss, injustice. But this was different. This was happening right here, in his own neighborhood, to a child who had no way to fight back. He grabbed his coat and keys, his mind racing. There was only one person who needed to see this first. Lisa Johnson sat on the edge of her couch, hands gripping her phone so tightly that her knuckles had turned white. She had made call after call, begging for help, searching for anyone who would listen, but no one had. And then came the knock. Sharp, urgent. She opened the door to find Mr. Harris standing there, his face tense, his eyes burning with something that made her heart stop. "I need to show you something." She followed him inside, barely breathing as he plugged the flash drive into her old laptop. The video played, the screen flickering in the dim light. She watched, her breath caught, her hand flew to her mouth as she saw the truth, the real truth. The boy on the bike, the rock, the way he disappeared into the night. Tears welled in her eyes, but this time they weren't just from pain, they were from something else, something she hadn't felt in days. Hope. "We need to get this to a lawyer." Her voice was steadier now, stronger. Mr. Harris nodded. "I know just the person." The next 24 hours were a blur. Calls were made, doors were knocked on. A new lawyer, one with fire in her voice and steel in her spine, took the case. And then a reporter got the footage. The story hit the news like a spark to dry grass. 10-year-old boy wrongly accused. New footage reveals truth. Headlines spread. Social media erupted. The pressure mounted. And inside that cold gray cell, Malik sat alone, still waiting, still wondering if anyone would believe him. But outside, beyond those bars, the world was finally listening. The courtroom was silent, thick with tension. The air felt heavy, as if everyone inside was holding their breath. At the center of it all, Malik sat still, his small hands clenched tightly in his lap. His mother sat just behind him, her fingers intertwined, knuckles pale from how hard she was gripping them. On the other side of the room, Officer Bradley sat tall, unmoving, his face unreadable. And at the front, standing with practiced confidence, was the prosecutor. He adjusted his tie, clearing his throat before turning to face the judge. "Your Honor, the defense has presented a video as evidence, but let's be clear, this footage is grainy, unclear, and inconclusive." He walked toward the screen where the paused video was displayed, a still image of a shadowy figure on a bike, mid-motion, a rock in hand. It's impossible to determine the true identity of this person. The image is blurred, the lighting poor. We cannot reasonably rely on this as solid evidence. His voice was smooth, authoritative. Meanwhile, we have the sworn testimony of a decorated police officer, a man trained to observe and report, who saw the defendant commit the crime with his own eyes. The prosecutor turned, facing the jury now. Who are you going to believe? A pixelated image on a screen, or the word of a trusted officer of the law? A murmur rippled through the courtroom. Malik felt his stomach twist. The truth was right there. The proof that he was innocent, that he didn't do it. But was the truth enough? Would anyone listen? The courtroom was suffocating. Malik could feel the weight of every eye on him. The judge, the jury, the strangers in the gallery, waiting for a verdict, waiting to decide his fate. The prosecutor's words still echoed in the air, twisting the truth into something unrecognizable. Who are you going to believe? A police officer's word versus a grainy video. The system had already made its choice. Malik's fingers dug into the arms of his chair. He glanced at his mother. Her eyes were locked on him, pleading but silent. He looked at Mr. Harris, his face tight with frustration. The lawyer beside him, tense, waiting. And then he looked at Officer Bradley, the man who had accused him, the man who had stolen his voice. For a moment, Malik hesitated. Maybe it wouldn't change anything. Maybe they had already made up their minds. But then a thought hit him. If I don't speak now, who will? His breath was unsteady, but his resolve was firm. Malik pushed himself to his feet. A ripple moved through the room, murmurs, a shift in posture. Even the judge raised an eyebrow. Malik swallowed hard and turned toward him. Your Honor, can I say something? The courtroom stilled. The judge hesitated, then nodded. Malik turned to the jury, his voice shaky but clear. I didn't throw that rock. He forced himself to keep going. I didn't do anything wrong, but none of that mattered, did it? He looked around, his eyes locking onto faces that wouldn't meet his. The second Officer Bradley saw me. He decided I was guilty. Not because he had proof, not because he saw me do it, but because I was there, because I looked like the kind of kid who would. A silence fell over the room, thick and suffocating. Malik's hands clenched at his sides. They always told me, if I did the right thing, if I followed the rules, I'd be okay. But I wasn't okay. His voice cracked, but he pressed on. I was thrown in a cell, taken from my mom, called a liar. His heart pounded against his ribs. I know what people see when they look at me. A deep breath. A black boy from the wrong neighborhood. A kid who must be guilty of something. His eyes met the judge's. But what happens when the truth doesn't matter? A pause, heavy, weighted. What happens when people like me don't get a chance to be heard? His voice was barely above a whisper now, but it cut through the silence like a blade. If I don't speak now, who will? The words hung in the air, sinking into the walls, into the people sitting before him. For the first time, Malik wasn't just defending himself. He was fighting for every kid who had ever been silenced before him. The lawyer took a steady breath, then turned toward the judge. Your Honor, I'd like to present new evidence. The judge gave a slow nod. A hush settled over the courtroom as the lights dimmed slightly. The projector flickered to life, and on the large screen, the grainy footage began to play. No one moved. The timestamp in the corner ticked forward. The street appeared, familiar yet distant, frozen in time. Then, there it was. A shadowy figure on a bike, speeding down the street. A hand reaching down. A rock lifted. A sharp flick of the wrist. The courtroom sat in absolute silence as the rock sailed through the air, as striking the windshield with a sharp, undeniable crack. It wasn't Malik. It wasn't even someone who looked like him. It was a white teenager, older, taller, his hoodie pulled up as he pedaled away, disappearing into the night like he had never been there at all. The image froze. A long, suffocating pause followed. Malik didn't dare move. Then, slowly, he turned his head. Officer Bradley sat stiffly in his seat, his face pale, his jaw locked. For the first time since this all began, his confidence wavered. His throat bobbed as he swallowed, his hands clenching into fists against the table. The prosecutor shifted uncomfortably. The judge leaned forward, his expression unreadable. And in that moment, the entire courtroom understood. Malik had been telling the truth all along. The silence in the courtroom was suffocating. The judge leaned forward, his gaze sharp, unwavering. His fingers drummed lightly against the wooden bench, the only sound in a room where no one dared to breathe. Then, his voice cut through the tension like a knife. "Officer Bradley," he said, his tone steady, deliberate. "You testified under oath that you saw this boy throw the rock, but the video tells a different story." The judge's piercing eyes locked onto Bradley, who sat rigid in his chair, his face drained of color. "You lied before this court. Do you have anything to say for yourself?" A ripple of unease spread through the room. Bradley shifted, his throat bobbing as he swallowed hard. His once confident posture now faltered. His hands gripped the arms of his chair, knuckles white. For the first time, he didn't have control. For the first time, he was the one under scrutiny. The entire courtroom waited. The jury, the prosecutor, the spectators in the gallery, leaning forward in their seats. But Bradley said nothing. Not a word. His lips parted, but no excuse came. No justification, no denial, because there was nothing left to say. The evidence was clear, and so was the truth. The judge let the silence stretch for a long moment, letting the weight of it sink into every corner of the room. Then he turned toward the jury, his voice firm, resolute. "It is clear that this young man has been falsely accused. Justice must be served." A murmur spread through the crowd. Relief, disbelief, righteous anger. Malik felt his mother's trembling hand close over his, squeezing tightly. For the first time since this nightmare began, he was free. Justice had finally won. The gavel struck one last time. Malik was free. His mother pulled him into her arms, her body trembling against his. The weight of every sleepless night, every desperate prayer, every silent tear finally released. Around them, the murmurs of the courtroom grew louder, a mix of relief, anger, and disbelief. Justice had won. Or had it? Officer Bradley was suspended from duty. No badge, no gun, no authority, but no handcuffs either, no trial, no real consequences. Internal investigation, they called it. Malik heard the whispers, saw the news headlines. They painted Bradley as a man who had made a mistake, who had misjudged the situation. Not as someone who had stolen a child's freedom, who had shattered a family's sense of safety. There would be no jail cell for him. No cold, sleepless nights. No hands trembling in fear, waiting for a verdict that could decide his future. No, that had been reserved for Malik. The lawsuit was settled, a large sum, enough to change their lives in some ways. But no amount of money could change what had already been taken. Malik wasn't the same. The boy who once laughed freely while playing basketball in the street now hesitated before stepping outside. The boy who had believed in fairness now questioned everything. Before, he had been taught that doing the right thing would protect him. Now, he knew better. His innocence had been stolen, not by a single night in a jail cell, but by the realization that the world wasn't what he thought it was. Justice had come, but it had come too late. Malik's story didn't fade after the trial. It didn't just disappear with the closing of the case, with the money, with the small sense of justice that came too late. No, Malik became something else entirely. He became a symbol. His story spread across the country. The video, the injustice, the boy who had been accused because of the color of his skin. His name appeared in newspapers, his face on TV. People marched for him. People protested with signs that read, "Justice for Malik." And with every voice that spoke out, the truth of what had happened to him became a call for change, a call that echoed from the streets to the highest offices in the land. Malik wasn't just a victim anymore. He was a message that said, this can't keep happening. But despite the attention, despite the movement that grew around him, Malik knew one thing. Nothing would ever erase what he had lost. One evening, after the dust had settled and the noise of protests had dimmed, Malik stood at the edge of a bridge, looking out over the city. The lights from the buildings below flickered in the distance, the hum of the world continuing as it always did. The cool breeze ruffled his hair, and for a moment he felt a strange stillness. His mother had made sure he was safe. He had a future, a chance to be something bigger than the boy they tried to break. But as he stood there, staring out over the city, he couldn't help but wonder, how many others didn't get this chance? His gaze drifted across the horizon. For every Malik Johnson, every child silenced before they could speak, there were countless others, too many others. And as he stood there, a thought gnawed at him. Would the world ever change for them? If you found Malik's story moving, don't forget to hit that like button and share it with your friends. Every share helps spread the message and keeps these important stories alive. And if you want to hear more inspiring stories like this, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss out. Your support means the world to us and gives us the motivation to keep creating meaningful content. Thank you for being a part of this journey. Top of form, bottom of form.